WorldComEDU. Elite Children's Classics.
The Last Leaf. In New York City, there is a small district called Greenwich Village. Years ago, it was a good place for poor artists to live. So a lot of artists came to look for cheap rooms with north windows. Sue and Johnsy had their room at the top of a brick building with 3 floors. Johnsy came from California and Sue came from Maine. They became friends at a small restaurant on 8th Street. They were both interested in the same kind of art and the same kind of food and clothes. So they decided to live and work together. That was in May. In November, a cold, silent killer, whom the doctors called pneumonia, visited New York. He touched a lot of people with his cold fingers. He walked slowly about Greenwich Village, too. Pneumonia was a cold-hearted killer. It was quite easy for him to attack little Johnsy, who was born in warm California. He touched Johnsy with his cold fingers. Then she lay on her old iron bed, almost without moving. She looked through a small window at the side of the brick house next door. Every day, the doctor came to see Johnsy. One morning, he asked Sue to follow him into the hall. "She has about 1 chance in 10 to live," he said. "That chance is for her to want to live. But your little lady has made up her mind that she's not going to get well. Does she have anything on her mind?" "She has always wanted to paint the Bay of Naples someday," said Sue. "Paint? Is there anything more important to think about? A man, perhaps?" "A man?" cried Sue. "No, doctor, she has never had a boyfriend." "Well, that's too bad," said the doctor. "Of course, I'll do all that science can do, but if she begins to think of dying only, these medicines won't do her any good. If she becomes interested in the new winter fashions, she'll have 1 chance in 5, I believe." After the doctor left, Sue went into the workroom and cried bitterly. Then she went whistling into Johnsy's room with her drawing board. Johnsy lay very quietly on her bed with her face toward the window. Sue thought she was asleep and stopped whistling. Sue began to draw a picture with a pen and ink for a magazine story. As she was sketching, she heard a low sound a few times. She hurried to Johnsy's bedside. Johnsy's eyes were wide open. She was looking out of the window and counting. Sue looked out of the window. The cold autumn wind was blowing hard. She wondered what Johnsy was counting. There was only a backyard and the wall of the brick house 20 feet away. Sue could see an old ivy vine climbing halfway up the brick wall. On the vine there were only a few leaves. "What is the matter with you?" asked Sue. "6," said Johnsy in a low, quiet voice. "They're falling faster now. 3 days ago there were about 100. It was hard for me to count them, but now it's easy. Look, another leaf has fallen. There are only 5 now." "5 what, dear? Tell your Susie." "Leaves on the vine. When the last one falls, I must die too. I've known that for 3 days. The doctor told you, didn't he?" "Oh, I've never heard such a foolish thing," said Sue. "Don't be a silly girl. The doctor told me this morning that you would surely get well. Try to take some soup now and let me go back to my drawing. Then I can sell my picture and buy port wine for you and thick slices of pork for me." "You don't have to get any more wine," said Johnsy, looking out of the window. "Look, another leaf. No, I don't want any soup. There are only 4 now. I want to see the last one fall before it gets dark. Then I'll go too." "Johnsy dear," said Sue, "will you promise me to keep your eyes closed and not to look out of the window till I finish working? I must finish these pictures by tomorrow. I need the light. Please close your eyes, or I must pull down the window shade." "Can't you draw in the other room?" said Johnsy coldly. "I would like to be here with you," said Sue, "and I don't want you to keep looking at those ivy leaves." Johnsy closed her eyes and said, "Tell me as soon as you've finished. I want to see the last one fall. I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of thinking. I want to go just like one of those poor leaves." "Try to sleep," said Sue. "I must go downstairs to ask Behrman to be my model. I'll be back soon. Don't try to move till I come back." Old Behrman was a painter who lived on the first floor of the same building. He was a little old man of over 60 and had a fine beard. He had begun painting 40 years before, but he did not succeed in art. Though he was always talking of painting a masterpiece, he had never painted one. Sometimes he painted commercial posters. Sometimes he received a little money by serving as a model for the poor young artists in Greenwich Village. He always tried to help the 2 young artists upstairs. Sue went downstairs and found Behrman in his small room. She told him about Johnsy and the leaves on the ivy vine. "She may die when the last leaf falls," said Sue.
"What?"
cried Behrman. His eyes were filled with tears.
"Why must she die just because the last leaf falls from the vine? I've never heard of such a thing," he said angrily. "But why did you let her have such a foolish idea? Oh, that poor little Johnsy!"
"She's very sick and weak," said Sue. "She has a high fever, and so she is full of strange ideas. Well, Mr. Behrman, if you don't want to be a model for me, you don't have to."
"You're just like a woman,"
cried Behrman.
"Who said I won't be your model? I'll come with you. This isn't a good place for a lady like Johnsy to lie sick. Some day I'll paint my masterpiece, and we'll go somewhere else."
Johnsy was sleeping when they went upstairs. Sue pulled down the window shade, and they went into the other room. There they looked out of the window at the ivy vine. Then they looked at each other for a moment without speaking. A cold rain was falling. When Sue woke from an hour's sleep the next morning, she found Johnsy with dull, wide-open eyes, gazing at the green window shade.
"Pull it up. I want to see,"
she said in a low voice. Sue didn't want her to look out of the window, but Sue had to do as she was told. After a heavy rain and a strong wind, there was only one leaf left on the vine. It hung there, about 20 feet above the ground. It looked fine and brave.
"It's the last one," said Johnsy. "I thought it would surely fall during the night. I heard the wind blow last night, but it'll fall tonight, and I'll go at the same time."
"Dear, dear," said Sue. "Think of me. If you won't think of yourself, I can't do anything without you." But Johnsy didn't answer. The day passed slowly. It was still raining heavily. When it was evening, they could see the last leaf still hanging from the vine. At last it was quite dark. The north wind began to blow again. The next morning came. When it was bright enough, Johnsy told Sue to pull up the shade. The ivy leaf was still there. Johnsy gazed at it for a long time. Then she called Sue, who was making chicken soup over the gas stove. "I've been a bad girl, Susie," said Johnsy. "Why didn't it fall? Something has made that last leaf stay there to show me how foolish I was. It is wrong to want to die. Will you bring me a little soup and some wine now? I want to sit up and watch you cook." An hour later, Johnsy said, "Susie, someday I hope to paint the Bay of Naples." The doctor came in the afternoon. When he left, Sue followed him into the hall to ask him about her sickness.
50-50 chance now,
said the doctor, taking Sue's cold, thin hands in his.
"If you take good care of her, you'll win. Now I must go downstairs to see another sick person. His name is Behrman. I think he's some kind of an artist. He's sick with pneumonia, too. He's an old, weak man, and he's very sick. There's no hope for him to get well, so I'm going to send him to the hospital today."
The next day, the doctor said to Sue,
"She's out of danger now. You've won. If she's given good food and good care, she'll surely be well again."
That afternoon, Sue came to the bed where Johnsy was knitting a blue scarf. Sue put one arm around Johnsy and said, "I have something to tell you, dear. Mr. Behrman died of pneumonia today in the hospital. He was sick only 2 days. The day before yesterday, the janitor found him very sick and weak in his room downstairs. His shoes and clothes were wet. He was as cold as ice. Where did he go on such a cold, rainy night? What was he doing that night? They couldn't tell. And then they found a lantern still lit and a wet and dirty ladder. They also found some brushes here and there and a palette with green and yellow colors on it. Now look out of the window, dear. Look at the last leaf on the wall," said Sue. "That night it was raining heavily and the wind was blowing hard, but there it was. Well, Johnsy, Behrman painted that leaf. He painted it on the wall that stormy night when the last leaf fell. That's certainly Behrman's masterpiece." Cop and the Hymn. Soapy moved uneasily on his bench in Madison Square. When wild geese begin to fly south at night, and when women without fur coats become kind to their husbands, and when Soapy moves uneasily on his bench in the park, you will know that winter is near at hand. A dead leaf fell on Soapy's feet. It was a message from Winter. Winter is kind to the people who sleep on the benches in Madison Square. He tells them he is coming. He gives the message to the cold north wind, and the poor people soon know that they must prepare for the bitter season. The north wind tells them that they must get ready for the coming winter. Now Soapy knew that it was time for him to decide where to spend the winter, so he moved uneasily on his bench. Soapy's hopes for the winter were not very high. He never thought of the Mediterranean Sea or the Bay of Naples. He only hoped to spend 3 months on Blackwell's Island. It was the place where he could get a bed and food and meet good friends too. It was also the place where he was free from the north wind and cops. This is why he liked the island best. Every year, Blackwell's prison was his winter home. When winter comes, rich people in New York buy their train tickets to Palm Beach in Florida or fly to the Riviera in France. Soapy tries to get his ticket too, but it is a cheap one to the island, and now was the time to get it. When he slept on his bench near the fountain, he used 3 newspapers, one under his coat, another around his feet, and the other over his legs. But he could not keep out the cold at all, so he thought of going to the island. In New York, there were some public places where poor people like Soapy could ask for a bed and food, but he was too proud to visit them. He did not want other people to take care of him. Soapy decided to go to the island and began to make plans. There were many ways of doing this.
I'll eat and drink a lot at a first-class restaurant and then say I can't pay. That's the easiest way of being handed over to a cop. Then the kind judge will send me to prison,
he said to himself. Soapy left his bench and walked slowly out of the park. He went toward Broadway, and he stopped at a nice-looking restaurant where rich people in their best clothes came together and enjoyed the best kind of wine and dishes every night. Soapy was quite all right from the lowest button of his vest to the top of his head. He was shaven, his coat was a good one, and his black tie was a gift from a kind lady missionary on Thanksgiving Day. If he could reach a table in the restaurant without arousing suspicion, success would be his. He felt confident that a waiter would bring him any dishes he wanted. He began to think of the dishes he was going to eat: roasted duck with a bottle of white wine, French cheese, a cup of coffee, and a cigar.
This big dinner will make me feel happy before I make a trip to the island,
he said to himself. But as soon as he stepped inside the restaurant, the head waiter saw his worn-out trousers and dirty old shoes. Soapy was quickly grabbed and carried out in silence and haste to the sidewalk. His first plan didn't work. Soapy went away from Broadway. He had to make another plan to get to the island. At a corner of 6th Avenue, there was a shop window shining brightly with electric lights and some beautiful things to sell. He picked up a stone and threw it through the glass. People came running around the corner to the shop. A cop was at the head of them. Soapy stood quietly with his hands in his pockets, smiling at the cop.
"Where's the man who broke the window?"
asked the cop excitedly.
"You think I did it, don't you?"
said Soapy in a friendly manner. The cop thought he was telling a lie. Men who break windows don't stay and talk to cops. They usually run away as quickly as they can. Then the cop saw a man running along the street to catch a streetcar and ran after him.
"Oh, this is an unlucky day,"
cried Soapy and walked slowly away. On the other side of the street, he found a small restaurant where people could eat a lot for a little money. He went into the restaurant. This time no one stopped him. He sat at a table and ate meat, bread, and pie. And then he told the waiter that he had no money.
"Now, go quickly and call a cop," said Soapy, "and don't keep me waiting."
"We don't have to call a cop," said the waiter. "Hey, come here," he called to another waiter. They took Soapy by the arms and kicked him out. A cop standing nearby laughed at him and walked down the street. Again the island seemed far away. He went a few blocks before he decided to try again to be caught by the police. Now he saw a good-looking young woman standing in front of a shop window. She was looking into the window. 2 yards from the window, he saw a big cop. She looked like one of the women who would ask a cop for help when they were harassed by a stranger. He felt that he was on his way to the island again. Soapy moved slowly toward the young woman. He smiled and went nearer to her. He saw the cop watching him. The young woman moved away a few steps and looked at the things in the window. Soapy followed her, stood beside her, and raised his hat and said,
Well, Bedelia, would you like to come and play with me?
The cop was still looking at them. Soapy expected her to call the cop. He was already thinking of living in the warm prison. But the young woman turned to him and smiled. She took his hand and said, "I'll be glad to go with you, Mike." Soapy had to walk down the street hand in hand with her. But at the next corner he left her and ran away. It was not easy for him to get to the island. Then he came to the brightest and busiest street in the city. There were a lot of stores, movie houses, and theaters around there. Women in fur coats and men in fine coats were walking joyfully under the winter sky. When he met another cop standing in front of a theater, a bright idea came to him. On the sidewalk, Soapy began to cry at the top of his voice. He pretended to be a drunken man. He danced, sang, and cried loudly. The cop turned his back to Soapy and said to one of the citizens,
"This is one of the Yale boys. They won the football game today, so they're noisy, but they won't hurt you. We were told to leave them alone."
Soapy felt sad and stopped shouting.
"I don't know what to do in order to go to the island," said Soapy. "It's like a paradise to me, but it seems to me that the island is an unattainable paradise."
He buttoned his thin coat against the chilling wind without any hope. In a cigar store, he saw a gentleman lighting a cigar. Beside him there was a silk umbrella. Soapy stepped inside, took the umbrella, and carried it away. The man followed him quickly.
"My umbrella!" he shouted. "Oh, is it?" said Soapy. "Well, why don't you call a policeman? I took it. It's your umbrella. Why don't you call a cop? There's a cop on the corner." "Of course," said the man. "That is well, you know. We often make mistakes. If it's your umbrella, I hope you'll excuse me. I picked it up this morning in a restaurant. If you say it's yours, I hope you'll excuse me." "Of course it's mine," said Soapy. The man looked at the cop on the corner and ran away. Then the cop walked quickly to help a tall, beautiful lady cross the street. Soapy walked east with the umbrella in his hand, but on the way he threw it as far as he could. At last, Soapy came to one of the avenues where there was little noise and not much light. He turned and began to walk toward Madison Square. He was going to his park bench. Suddenly, he stopped on a very quiet corner. There stood an old church. A soft violet light was coming through a stained glass window. In the church, a woman was playing the organ. She was playing the hymn which the choir would sing the next Sunday. Soapy could hear the sweet music. It was so pure and sweet that he was completely absorbed in it. He stood in front of the old iron fence and listened to it. The moon was bright above him. There were few cars and people on the street. "I know that hymn very well. I often heard it when I was young,"
said Soapy to himself. He was thinking of his old happy days. Suddenly he felt sad.
"I wonder what kind of man I am now. Do I have any hopes for the future? Am I living an honest and useful life?"
he asked himself sadly. The influence of the old church brought a sudden and wonderful change to his heart. He wanted to be born again. He decided to start a new life. There was still time, and he was young enough to change his life.
"Tomorrow I'll go downtown and find work," said Soapy hopefully. "A fur merchant once offered me a job as a driver. I'll find him and ask him for the job. I'll be somebody in the world.
Just then, Soapy felt someone touch his shoulder. He looked quickly around into the face of a cop.
"What are you doing here?" asked the cop. "Nothing," said Soapy.
Oh, loitering, eh? Then come along with me to the police station, said the officer.
The next morning, Soapy stood in front of the magistrate.
3 months on Blackwell's Island,
said the magistrate. The First Christmas. Do you know when and where Jesus Christ was born? This is the story of the first Christmas. About 2,000 years ago, there lived a man named Joseph and a woman named Mary in the village of Nazareth. Joseph was a carpenter. They were good and kind. Soon they got married. One day, the Roman emperor wanted to know the number of people who lived in the Roman Empire. So the emperor told all the people to go back to the towns and villages where they were born, and he told them to write their names on the official list. In those days, Palestine was ruled by Rome. So both Joseph and Mary went together all the way from Nazareth to Bethlehem in order to register their names. When they came to Bethlehem, they found the village full of people from all over the country. Joseph and Mary went from door to door to find a room for themselves, but all the inns and houses were full of people, and they could not find any room to rest. Mary got very tired. Finally, one woman with a kindly face said, "We have guests in every room, but you can rest in the stable if you don't mind." On that night, as they were resting there, God decided to send a baby to this world. Thus, Mary had a baby boy and laid him in a manger in the stable. On the same night, some shepherds were looking after their sheep in the fields near Bethlehem. Suddenly, a great light shone around them, and they saw an angel of God standing before them. They were filled with fear and could not speak any words. The angel said to them, "Don't be afraid. I have brought good news for you. Today in Bethlehem, a Savior has been born to you all. He will save the world. You will see him lying in a manger. He is Jesus Christ." After the angel left them, they said to one another,
"Let's go to Bethlehem and see this wonderful thing that God has told us about."
They ran as fast as they could. As God led them on their way, they easily found the baby. Then they worshipped him and returned to the fields. At that time, in a far country east of Bethlehem, there lived 3 wise men who studied the stars. Every night they watched the stars. One night, one of them saw a big new star shining in the sky.
"Look," he said, "a new star. I've never seen such a big bright star." "Something important may happen on Earth," said the second wise man.
"This book says," said the third man excitedly, "a Savior has been born when such a bright star appears."
"I would like to go and see the baby," said the first wise man. "But how can we find him?" asked the second wise man. "Besides, Bethlehem is a long way from here."
"Let's go on our camel. I'm sure that the star will lead us to the baby,"
said the third man. They started for Bethlehem. They went over the fields and the hills. After a long journey, they reached Bethlehem.
"Where is the baby Christ? We are looking for him," they asked. "We have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him."
But no one could tell them where Jesus Christ was lying. When Herod, the king of Judea, heard that a Savior was born, he was very afraid, because he did not want anyone to take his throne away from him. So Herod decided to kill Jesus Christ. Herod called all his priests and said,
"Where was Christ born?"
But no one knew. Then Herod sent for the 3 wise men and said,
"Tell me about the star. When did it appear? What do you think it means?"
And he went on to say,
"Go to Bethlehem and find him. When you have found him, let me know. I'll go myself to worship him." The 3 wise men set out to look for the baby. Again the star went ahead of them and stopped just above the place where the baby lay.
Here we are at last! Let's go in and worship him,
they cried, and entered the stable. There they saw the little baby with his mother Mary.
Our Lord,
they cried and bowed to the baby. Then they brought out their gifts of great value and offered them to the baby Christ. That night they had a dream. In it they were told not to go back to Herod, so they returned to their country by a different route. This is how Jesus Christ was born about 2,000 years ago. That was the first Christmas.